Welcome to another deep dive.
Great to be diving in again.
Today we're pulling back the curtain on a really fascinating, maybe often misunderstood part of many Western cities, Chinatowns.
Mm-hmm.
You probably picture, the vibrant street markets, amazing food, unique shops.
Absolutely, the tourist hotspots.
Exactly. But what our sources have revealed about their origins and what's happening now, it's been genuinely eye-opening, even for us.
It really has. The layers are complex.
We've got two big questions we're going to explore today. First, why were Chinatowns and Chinese restaurants so often found in, or like right next to, historically red light districts? We're talking Vancouver, Chicago, Boston, even places like Amsterdam.
That's a really key historical point, yeah.
And then we'll dive into why so many of these historic neighborhoods across the U.S. are now facing, well, gentrification.
A huge issue.
And it's causing the next generation of residents to actually move out, often to the suburbs. It's a story of unexpected connections and just constant change.
That's right. And these aren't just like separate historical facts or modern trends. They're deeply intertwined with, huge forces like immigration patterns, how cities get planned or not planned, and broader societal ideas about otherness.
Okay.
What's truly fascinating, I think, is how these communities, often really marginalized, targeted even, how they managed to carve out these vital spaces for themselves. And now those same hard-won spaces are transforming again under completely new pressures.
So let's start there with that initial intriguing historical link. When Chinese immigrants first arrived in the West, our sources show they often ended up in very particular areas.
Right.
Why those specific spots, and what was the connection to areas known for, well, red light activities?
It's a compelling place to start. Initially, Chinese immigrants often clustered together out of sheer necessity. Survival, really.
Right.
Many arrived with very little, sometimes undocumented, looking for cheap housing, safety in numbers, and just a way to make a living. They took jobs in restaurant kitchens, garment sweatshops, often in areas that were considered, frankly, urban slums.
Right. The less desirable parts of town.
Exactly. But our sources highlight something interesting. These immigrant small business owners were incredibly resourceful, fearless even.
Oh, yeah.
Willing to operate in what are described as dodgy urban neighborhoods, areas often ignored by others, maybe seen as food deserts.
Which meant less competition.
Precisely. Less competition for them, but what's really critical here, and this is key from the sources,
Yeah.
these urban environments weren't just places immigrants happened to choose. In many ways, they were designed to contain certain populations.
Designed. How so?
Well, take British Columbia as an example. The sources show government authorities, missionaries too, actively work to create a racially homogenous white province.
Okay.
But the cheap labor of Chinese and indigenous peoples was essential for building things, for the economy.
So they needed the labor.
They needed the labor, but they actively disavowed the presence of these people. It's a real contradiction.
Wow. And that led directly to the creation of what our sources call racialized spaces, like Chinatowns, distinct zones shaped by racial segregation.
That's a powerful idea, being contained rather than just choosing. So areas they were effectively pushed towards.
Pretty much, yeah.
How did that deliberate containment then connect specifically with red light districts?
It's a very direct link.
Yeah.
Because these racialized spaces were then often labeled or constituted as degenerate spaces by the dominant white society.
Degenerate?
Yeah. In British Columbia, Chinatowns became known, officially almost, as hubs of immorality and lawlessness.
Seriously?
Seriously. They were characterized as places where undesirable activities, prostitution, illegal alcohol, gambling, opium use could happen with impunity.
With impunity, why?
Because crucially, these activities happening there wouldn't jeopardize white settlement in other quote-unquote respectable parts of the city. It was a deliberate containment of perceived social problems.
So keep it over there. Exactly. In cities like Vancouver and Victoria, even smaller places like Cumberland, officials actively argued that vice was just rampant in these Chinese quarters.
They argued it was, like, maybe exaggerating.
Well, the records mention it specifically. In Cumberland, for instance, about 700 Chinese residents were noted in official records for drinking, opium, gambling, prostitution. But here's the twist. While prostitution was called a social evil, it was tolerated within these Chinese quarters.
Tolerate.
Specifically to keep it geographically separate from those respectable white neighborhoods.
So it sounds like more than just tolerance. It sounds like a deliberate, almost strategic way to pin society's problems onto these marginalized communities.
That's exactly what the sources suggest.
Would that serve a purpose for the authorities beyond just,
Oh,
scapegoat act?
absolutely, a huge purpose. White officials actively use this immoral and indecent reputation of Chinese quarters to basically prop up their own moral standing.
Oh, right. By comparison.
Exactly, and justify more control. What's really striking is how this narrative escalated.
How so?
The widespread images of prostitution in Chinatown actually set the stage for what our sources call the white slavery panic in 20th century British Columbia.
Well, slavery. Yeah, what was that?
It was this widespread, largely baseless moral panic, fears about white women being kidnapped, forced into prostitution, often supposedly by non-white men, including Chinese men.
Wow, that sounds
Dangerous.
Incredibly dangerous. It was a powerful, insidious narrative used to paint Chinese men as predatory pimps and Chinese women as, well, inherently prostitutes.
good grief.
Authorities sometimes even recommended that Chinese women assumed to be prostitutes just be sent back to China. Assumed. And this whole prejudice narrative bled into popular culture, too, depicting Chinatowns with, like, hidden depths, basements, secret tunnels.
The whole Fu Manchu stereotype stuff.
Kind of, yeah. Places of sinister happenings or even criminal and occasionally magical activities. The link between this supposed moral underbelly and the actual physical space, the streets and buildings, was made explicit.
That's chilling. And this wasn't just a Canadian thing, right? This happened elsewhere.
No, not at all unique. While the specifics might differ, the underlying dynamics, discriminatory zoning, racializing space, were pretty common across Western cities, including in the U.S.
Like where?
In Chicago, for example, early 20th century zoning policies made it way more likely for neighborhoods with lots of Southern-born blacks or first-generation immigrants to be zoned for manufacturing.
And manufacturing zoning meant?
It essentially allowed for any use.
Yeah.
So another way to concentrate undesirable activities in specific marginalized areas.
Okay, I see the pattern.
And in New York City, historical sources directly link Manhattan's Chinatown to Chinatown gangs and the Chinatown underworld, reinforcing that exact image of illicit activity that often went hand in hand with red light districts.
Right.
Boston, too. Historical descriptions talk about its Chinatown having trapdoor spaces, basements, and tunnels, sinister happenings, making that same explicit connection between the moral panic and the physical place.
And you mentioned Amsterdam.
Yeah, even in Europe, places like Amsterdam's red light district historically had and still have Chinese restaurants right in the mix. It points to this global pattern of immigrant communities finding a foothold in zones considered less desirable by the majority.
So they were often funneled into these specific, often stigmatized areas.
That seems to be a big part of the story, yeah.
It's clear that from day one, Chinatowns were shaped by these really powerful external pressures. And what's striking is, our sources show those pressures haven't vanished. They've just changed form.
Evolved, exactly.
And today, many of these historic neighborhoods face a totally new battle, gentrification. What are the sources telling us about this transformation?
It's a huge deal, a truly existential threat for many of these communities. Our sources flat out say Chinatowns across the country face existential threats from gentrification, big development projects, and just massive displacement.
Existential threats, that's strong language.
It is. And to back it up, two prominent ones, Philadelphia's Chinatown and Seattle's Chinatown International District, were actually listed among America's 11 most endangered historic places just last year, 2023.
Wow. By the National Trust.
By the National Trust for Historic Preservation. Yeah, that gives you a sense of the scale here.
Definitely. What does that look like on the ground?
Well, take San Francisco, the oldest Chinatown in the continental U.S. Dozens of Chinese families are facing eviction from affordable housing they've lived in for ages.
Why?
Building owners want to renovate and rent to, higher paying young professionals moving into the city.
Ah, the classic gentrification story.
Pretty much, and the numbers really drive it home. In Philly and Boston, for example, the number of white residents living in Chinatown more than doubled in just 10 years, from 2000 to 2010.
Doubled. That's incredibly fast.
It's a rapid, profound demographic shift.
What does that do to the identity of these places, the cultural fabric?
It's devastating, according to some experts. Peter Kwong, a professor who studied Chinatowns for over 40 years, he gives a really stark assessment. He says out of the 15 biggest Chinatowns in the U.S., only maybe 3 are still thriving, authentic places where Chinese people predominantly live and work.
Only 3.
That's his view. He argues that once gentrification really takes hold, rents just skyrocket.
Right.
And the original Chinese residents are systematically forced out. What's left, he says, often becomes mainly a tourist destination, an image of the exotic.
The community itself.
By that time, he says, Chinese are gone.
Oof, that's bleak.
It is. This transformation is described by some sources as a hollowing out of Chinatown's cultural identity.
Hollowing out.
Yeah. Being turned into what one source really critically calls a sanitized ethnic playground for the rich to satisfy their exotic appetite for a dim sum and fortune cookie fix.
Wow, that's a pointed language.
It is. And that phrase, racial capitalism, that comes up in the sources, it's incredibly insightful. It highlights how even cultural identity itself becomes a commodity. It's not just that rents go up. It's that the very ethnic charm of Chinatown, the thing outsiders are now paying a premium to experience, that often becomes the engine driving out the original community.
So their heritage becomes a spectacle that displaces them.
Exactly. It commodifies non-whiteness, turning residents into, like, trophies or passive emblems for outsiders.
So beyond this cultural commodification, it really boils down to the economic pressure, right? Rising property values.
Absolutely. That's a key, relentless driver. We see it acutely in New York City's Chinatown experiencing a major displacement crisis as values soar.
And other cities.
Chicago's Chinatown seems slightly better off regarding housing affordability. Fewer households are severely rent burdened, according to the data we saw.
Okay, some variation.
But older Chinatowns, like San Francisco's, face unique challenges. Their housing stock is just really old.
Harder to maintain. More expensive.
Exactly, which makes them prime targets for redevelopment and flipping. It's this constant tension between preservation and profit.
So as these historic Chinatowns grapple with these huge pressures, our sources point to another big trend, almost the flip side maybe. The outward migration of Chinese Americans to the suburbs. Why is that happening? What does it tell us about how the American dream is evolving for these communities?
It's a really fascinating evolution, actually. Historically, those dense urban Chinatowns made sense.
Right, the necessity argument again.
First-gen immigrants clustered for support, safety, economic need. They rented cheap apartments because often there weren't other options.
Okay.
But the aspiration for many immigrant families, and definitely their kids, was always to achieve the American dream and live in the suburbs.
The house, the yard, the schools.
Exactly, the whole package. Now, with China itself becoming more affluent and global immigration patterns shifting,
Things are different.
things are different. Many newly arrived Chinese immigrants are actually bypassing Chinatown altogether and heading directly to the suburbs.
Really, skipping the traditional first stop.
Yeah. And for some, this is seen explicitly as a positive development.
Positive how?
It allows families to avoid what one source calls the Chinatown grind, working those low-wage, often tough restaurant and garment jobs.
Okay.
And instead, live in nice homes and raise their kids in a safe environment. It represents upward mobility, better opportunities.
So new communities, new hubs of Chinese culture are just forming elsewhere, outside the old city centers.
Precisely. And it's a pretty normal progression, really. We've seen it with other immigrant groups.
Like who?
Think about Korean communities in LA. They initially concentrated in Koreatown, right? But then later generations moved out to suburbs like Fullerton or Irvine, and those places became vibrant new Koreatowns in their own right.
With their own businesses, community centers.
Exactly. Strong communities, cultural institutions. Chinese communities are doing the same thing now in many places.
So these are sometimes called satellite Chinatowns.
That's the term used, yeah. Satellite Chinatowns. Our sources note they're popping up, burgeoning, around New York, for instance. Little Chinatowns, appearing in places like Brooklyn, filled with both newcomers and folks moving out from Manhattan.
So from one perspective then, this isn't necessarily a loss of identity tied to one specific place.
Right.
But maybe a natural evolution. Achieving that American dream, spreading the culture more broadly.
That's definitely one powerful way to look at it, yeah, that comes through in the sources. It suggests community and culture aren't static. They aren't confined to just one historic spot.
You can move, adapt.
Exactly. For many, moving on from the traditional urban Chinatown just represents success, better opportunities, a different life. But it's also important to note this really interesting counter trend that's emerging. Some of the new young generation of Asian Americans are actually stepping up, becoming activists.
Do what?
To protect and secure the future of the traditional historic Chinatowns. They don't just see them as places their grandparents settled,
They see them
as their ancestral homelands, vital sites of heritage, cultural memory that need to be preserved, fought for.
wow, so a real push and pull.
Absolutely. It really shows this complex interplay of forces, economics, identity, history, aspiration, all shaping these unique and constantly evolving neighborhoods.
What a deep dive, seriously, into the evolving story of Chinatowns. From those complex, often really tough origins in dense cities.
Shaped by necessity, but also by segregation.
Right, to their current struggles with gentrification, displacement, and this outward move to the suburbs. These neighborhoods are just such dynamic living histories.
It really underscores how cities are just constantly in flux, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And how immigrant communities adapt, transform, survive within them. The stories of Chinatowns really remind us that urban spaces are never static.
Never finished.
Exactly. The forces of history, economics, culture, they're always at play, always shaping and reshaping these vital community hubs.
And that's our deep dive for today. We really hope you gained some maybe surprising insights and perhaps a deeper appreciation for the nuanced history and the ongoing transformations of these vital communities.
Thanks for tuning in.